Well, thanks for all staying around, and hopefully you enjoyed some sweets from the catering at Museum London. And if you stick around after the keynote, we also have some savory treats for you before you head out into the storm. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really pleased that we're now going to have a panel dealing with the theme of community. And as Tom Cull indicated, I wouldn't want to say he came into our project through the back door, but he certainly was an invited guest, and then we realized we couldn't live without him. And as it turns out, I think London would have a hard time living without Tom and all his amazing involvements in the community. So he will be the host, and he'll be introducing all the participants.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. It's so great to be here with this fine panelist of friends and colleagues and fellow artists. Our panel this afternoon, this panel is on community. And I'm really excited to get talking with these artists about their work, both as it intersects with the idea of community, but also working in and with communities. So what's going to happen? I'm going to introduce each one, and they'll come up and give a little presentation of their work. And then at the end, I'll have them join me on stage here, and I've got a couple of questions for them, and I'm really interested also in your questions for them. We're hoping to let the kind of conversation meander and meet in confluences. We'll take our inspiration from the river. So the first person that I want to introduce is Olivia Mossuto. Olivia is an emerging artist, designer, and writer. Her practices combine painting, sculptures, and installation with an approach that coalesces on topics of kitsch, craft, grief, and nature. She completed her BFA at Western University in London, Ontario in 2019, and her MA in Fine Art at Chelsea College of Art and Design in London, UK in 2020. Olivia is also the coordinating editor for the Embassy Cultural House, an artist-run center based in London, Ontario, Canada. So everyone, please welcome Olivia.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to GardenShip for having me. I'm very honored to be on this panel beside a lot of other great speakers. Just to introduce myself, I'm the coordinating editor for the Embassy Cultural House. I've been working for the ECH, as we like to call it, for around 3 years. And just to start, I'd like to give a little introduction about the Embassy Cultural House, what it is we do and how we got here. And so the story starts in 1983, and it begins with co-founders Ron Benner, Jamili Hassan, and Eric Stack, who started the Embassy in 1983 after alternatives to institutions sort of dried up. They were looking for a space to program progressive and exciting projects sort of outside of the confines of bureaucracy. So this culminated between 1983 to 1990, and they closed their proverbial doors at that time. And it was during this period that the Embassy Cultural House programmed out of the Embassy Hotel, which was located on Dundas Street, and it was actually owned by Jamili's sister, Helen Haller. And so at its core, this project was extremely community-oriented, as the space was, the Embassy Cultural House was located in a place where lots of different kinds of people were coming together. So hotel tenants were coming together with artists, we're coming together with writers, and lots of other different kind of people. And so when COVID-19 hit in 2020, there was a desperate need for community. And Ron and Jamili's son, Tarek Hassan Gordon, believed that there needed to be a sort of resurgence of this community at such a difficult time in many people's lives. And so Tarek started to build an online archive of the ECH's comings and goings. And it turned out to be a lot more than that. It turned into projects, it turned into talks, it turned into an online archive, which has not been launched, but is also in the wings somewhere. But it became a very intense project that not only sought to preserve all of those relationships and connections, but also to bring them back together. And it was a really important beginning, starting this up again in 2021, because a lot of the people from that generation between 1983 to 1990 are a bit older, and some of the people that were part of that initial community have passed away. And so we're preserving these connections as best we can, and we're creating new ones along with a whole other host of people. I've brought some props to help out here. So our very first project that the Embassy Cultural House did in 2021 was Hiding in Plain Sight. And actually, between GardenShip and Embassy Cultural House, there is a lot of crossover in terms of our contributors and our values. And so you'll notice that there's some people in here who also show up in GardenShip and State. And so basically this first project had to do with a transnational crime syndicate hiding in plain sight, which is the kind of penultimate quote that this project was organized around, which is a quote by journalist Sarah Kendzior. And so the way that it had started is that Ron Benner, co-founder, had sent out an email to all of his friends and artists that he knew and people that he admired to submit to this project. And thus that sort of spurred things and kept things going. And there's a lot more to say, but I'll say that we are still going. And there has been many more publications. We've also published, Pandemic Gardens, which again, some more crossover with GardenShip. And this was our second publication. And then we've also got another publication that just came out, which is Prophecy in the News. And this is by Stephen Adams. And I'd also like to let you know that we have the second issue of our tabloid at the table, which is available for free. And yes, Tom's holding it up. So we're doing a lot. And if you have any interest in getting involved or you're interested in our programs, it's basically an open door. We just ask that you bring your energy, enthusiasm, passion, ideas. And, we want to help kind of bolster that and encourage that. So the books are in the shop and the tabloids are at the table. So thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Next up, Paul Chartrand. Paul Chartrand engages with environmental issues through the construction of sculptural life support apparatuses populated with living plants. He repurposes objects and cultural signifiers like language to act as habitats and conceptual support systems. Currently, he is focused on living text installations, hydroponic assemblages, and interdisciplinary drawing practices. Paul, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Not sure where to start. I am struggling with a little bit of a sugar rush from the treats. So basically I've been working with these kind of constructed habitat community amalgamation assemblages since around 2013 at the tail end of my bachelor's at Guelph. And I really tackled the subject more directly during my master's at Western from 2015 to 2017. And I've continued working in that realm. I have kind of started moving a little bit more in a direction of these kind of impermanent projects, just from a logistical standpoint. I've been doing a lot of work with sprouting live text That was something that kind of emerged really close to the end of my master's program. And this is probably the best example that I have right now. This was a passage from the Bible, oddly enough, where it really kind of connects back to this idea of stewardship of the earth that a lot of people tend to gloss over in their readings of Genesis, where they think more about the dominion side of things. And so I don't know if there's any other slides of the overall installation, but there was an up and down kind of meandering piece of receipt paper that I used to, and before I move on too quickly, the text is actually desiccated grass that was grown and still exists in the frame. Anyway, yeah, so the meandering receipt paper is covered with the names of over 300 environmental activists, indigenous community members, and people basically who have been killed defending the land, murdered in many cases. And it was weird because I started it and it was just kind of an automatic writing exercise a little bit in terms of transcribing these names that I had found. And the list that I had compiled up to that point, it's grown since, but it ended an inch away from the end of the receipt paper roll. So it was anecdotally, I thought it was interesting. And then the table here, which was generously lent to me by Patrick, shows the hydroponic table that I had built for the exhibition. But again, logistical issues arise in larger institutions sometimes. And we ended up displaying the table, which was built to contain one of these living texts. We displayed it in a cafe that really focuses on environmental and social activism and tenets in Dunnville, which is where I'm currently living. And so there was text inside, and they were using it for the first couple of months in their cafe menu. There was sprouts that they were harvesting. So yeah, probably don't have very much time to go into depth on anything. So I'll just talk to you in a little bit.
Thanks, Paul. Brandon Doxtator was originally, we were hoping to get him on both panels, the one this morning, the one this afternoon, but he had to leave us. So we thank him though for his participation this morning and his participation in this kind of growing family that is GardenShip and State. I'd like to now introduce another member of that family, if I may. Michelle Wilson is an artist and mother. In the Euro-American archive, the bodies of other animals are used to convey colonial knowledge systems. Their stories of survival are used to perpetuate myths of settler saviors. As a feminist of settler descent working in colonial institutions, this is the legacy that Wilson has inherited and is confronting. She successfully defended her PhD dissertation, Remnants, Outlaws, and Wallows, Practices for Understanding Bison, in May of 2022 at the University of Western Ontario. She is currently a postdoctoral scholar with the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership at the University of Guelph. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. So I was meditating a little bit on what it means to be in community, and a way that I deal with my anxiety is to plan. So I'm just going to kind of read this story a little bit. When I was younger and figuring out myself as a person and an artist, I aligned myself with the punk community in Ottawa. But there was a lot of harm built into this scene that I've spent the last 20 years unpacking, and I think we forget how far we've come in 20 years. Variations of feminist killjoy. I won't go into them. They're really awful, were weaponized against me. What I would now call an ethics of care was ridiculed, and I learned to keep quiet about my queer identity. A positive outcome from these formative years is how they helped me to see who I didn't want to be in community, that it is possible and actually necessary to practice care and criticism simultaneously. All this is to say that I still wrestle with how I want to show up in my art and activism, which for me are inseparable. So my practice takes two tracks specific to my identity as a white woman interested in anti-colonial work and our relationships with the more than human. One is of critical intervention, and one is of collaborative care. So the first stream of work is really inherently critical. It is the work I do mostly on my own because I can and should take that on. And that is confronting the settler colonial archive and its institutions. Forced migration, which you see here, is the work that I made for GardenShip and State, and is an example of that approach. It's an interactive textile piece. There are audio stories embedded in the piece that follow a lineage of bison as they are extracted from their families and the land, reconceived as property and shuffled from owner to owner. I created this work partly because, as an uninvited guest on Indigenous land, we are continually and falsely told that national parks and our conservation system in general are a benevolent inheritance from our settler ancestors. We are told this through archives created and maintained by parks and conservation societies, focusing on the quote-unquote salvation of charismatic species like bison. So in forced migration, I mine these archives and I write back at what they contain and create alternative stories of the bison's path to protected parks. The audio essays reveal how ideologies around capitalism, human exceptionalism, and white supremacy have dictated how conservation is practiced. But even in this piece, I think there is evidence of that second stream that is founded in care and collaboration. So forced migration has 8 audio stories that are triggered by touching it. 7 are primarily narratives of the past, but the 8th is an open letter to the current management of Parks Canada. In it, I propose an apology to the Indigenous peoples the government has forced from their lands in Wood Buffalo, nations which have been barred from their ancient relationships of reciprocity with the land. And I must say that this is an apology that they are still asking for, yet to receive. And within it, it includes actionable steps towards decolonized relationships with bison, Indigenous peoples, and the land in Wood Buffalo. So I did not come up with these recommendations. I worked in partnership with local activists and educators, Chloe Dragonsmith and Robert Granjambe. They are a married couple who are the last full-time trappers to live on their ancestral lands in Wood Buffalo. So my relationship with Chloe and Robert and the questions that we uncovered that I couldn't possibly address in this piece have become the foundation of my current postdoc at the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership with the University of Guelph, which I'm just beginning. So in my work, I endeavor to expose truth long ignored by settlers and make space for acts of care that might begin to heal on a small scale. So I think that that can be seen more explicitly in the Close Collective, which I kind of act as a project manager for, I guess. I assigned myself the job of being the project manager for. So the Close Collective describes ourselves as an ad hoc group of artists, educators, and activists that have come together to attend to our responsibilities and relationships with the Coves, an environmentally significant area in the middle of London, Ontario, recovering from years of misuse. For the collective, the Coves is a fertile space for anti-colonial ecological justice actions, a place where human and more than human communities have been coming together to negotiate reciprocity and care for years. The actions of the collective include tracing careful paths, which I've talked a little bit about, a community-produced textile map facilitated by myself and Riley Knowles. SOS, which Paul didn't talk about, a living phytoremediation artwork that he built on the land. We built, I guess, together on the land in the spring. On the land teachings, including traditional medicine gathering and medicine pouch making that Candace spoke about earlier. And carp fishing with Brad Isaacs, where you can see there, with Kelly Green. And then we also had clay harvesting and vessel making guided by Shauna Red Sky, who would have loved to have been here with you today, but couldn't make it. So as part of my work for the collective, I've done a fair amount of archival research into settler uses of this land. First, as a Canadian military firing range and training camp and ice harvesting business. Then as a fruit orchard and paint factory, and now as an abandoned brown site that's being reclaimed and healed by human and more than human communities. This last summer, I led weekly hikes around the area. People found out about them on Instagram or social media and just met me in the German Club parking lot. And I led them through the space, discussing what I've learned, and we tended to Paul's phytoremediation piece. It was a really dry summer. And so one of the ways we honored that piece was by carrying water from the ponds to the piece to keep it alive as best as we could. We tracked these hikes using a GPS app, and these traces became the foundation of the community-produced embroidery quilt, I guess we could call it, Tracing Careful Paths, which you can see, again, at the community projects table. And this map was created using textiles dyed by Riley, using black raspberries, goldenrod, and black walnut from the site. One of the things that got me interested in the coves was that I saw a lot of children playing there and a lot of foraging happening. People with like a grocery bag full of black raspberries they were going to take home and eat. And at that time, I was trying to become pregnant myself. And so I was thinking more about, what do we put in our bodies and what are the long-term effects? And so I went to a biologist at Western, Sheila McPhee, and I said, can we test these black raspberries? People are eating them. So I harvested some from the chain link fence that still marks the paint factory site. And we had them tested. It wasn't the most rigorous scientific collection system, but I did my best, and we did find that they were 7 times the maximum allowable amount of lead for black raspberries. So I think Riley taking up these plants and honoring what they were doing by dye making was a way to draw attention to the fact that we cannot be consuming them, but they are doing such important work extracting those chemicals that have such a long memory and presence in that soil. We also drank the most beautiful sumac tea, and sumac grows throughout the coves, but I wouldn't serve it to anyone for fear that I would be poisoning them. One of the beautiful things that came out of the map was Sherry No shared their knowledge about fish hide tanning. And so the fish that we caught with Brad, we were able to tan the skin and include it in the map. And usually that tanning process is done with red rose tea, but it can also be done with sumac leaves. And so the sumac from the coves that cannot be drunk or eaten became the tanning tea for that hide. So just this circular relationship with the land is so important. So yeah, we stitched together the imagery at weekly sewing circles hosted by the Landon Library from October to early December. It's still a work in progress, but Riley and I are committed to finishing it by May, when I will be exhibiting it and telling the stories that it contains at Homemaking, a Symposium at Concordia University. And the collective hopes to continue its community-engaged work on the land this summer, including another carp fishing day and hide tanning workshop, a weaving with riverbank grape workshop, and Riley and I had kind of been talking about a love letters to fallen trees intervention. We've yet to secure funding, so if you have some money, no. But regardless of that, we have to continue our commitment to this place to see how we are reciprocally changed. And the Coves Collective work will be featured in an exhibition at Macintosh Gallery in 2024. So I hope to see you all again then. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next up, we have Nina Zitani. Dr. Nina Zitani teaches at Western and is the curator of the zoological collections in the Department of Biology. Nina is an accomplished field research biologist with a passion for teaching people of all ages and backgrounds about the wonders of the living parts of the natural world. She uses her extraordinary creativity and photography to enrich her lectures on evolutionary biology, biodiversity, and conservation science. I'll tell you that I teach a creative writing course at Western, and it's a nature writing course. And so I really wanted to have my students, we spend a lot of time outside. I really wanted to immerse my students in all the different languages of studying the natural world. And so I cold called Dr. Zitani, who's become a very good friend, and I sent her an email and said, can I bring my students to your class? And this has begun a relationship that we've had where my students go and Nina gives them a tour of the entire campus, introducing them to the trees that live on the campus. And then we do a tour of the zoological collection. And so I can't say enough about the work that Nina has done. And I'd just like to welcome you to the stage.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks so much. I am so happy to be here. This is really, for me, a wonderful treat. I am both an artist and a scientist, but my role in the exhibition GardenShip was really kind of from it was through my role as a curator of the Zoology Museum, so more from like the scientific standpoint. But to convince you that I really am an artist, a couple of my slides, images from the Amazon. So my passion, everything that I do is about biodiversity. I'm an educator. I consider myself like number one as an educator, and teaching people about nature, about biodiversity and the importance of nature and how, humans are dependent on nature, and that, biodiversity is in decline, and why is it in decline? And what can we do about it? I'm not a pessimist. I'm very much an optimist. But First and foremost, I'm a field biologist. I mean, since I was like 2 years old, I've been, just immersed in nature. And like, Brandon said when he was speaking with us through, remotely earlier today about, just being in nature and loving to hear the sounds and the sense of nature and the fragrances and the odors and, and the birds and the insects and the wind blowing through the trees is just like, to me, that's where I want to be. And so I've been very fortunate to have traveled around the world lecturing about biodiversity and the conservation of nature, but mostly in the Amazon, starting out actually in the tropical forests of Central America and then eventually moving to the Amazon. And this is the Peruvian Amazon rainforest. And I started doing photography. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, by the way. And then I started doing photography as I moved into becoming a scientist in my master's degree and PhD, and doing photography just to document what I was seeing, to use it in publications, to remind me of what I was seeing, like to take a record of what I was seeing for both, research purposes and just my own, my own knowledge, my own, for my own learning, for also teaching. And but then I started just basically using the photography as a form of art. And so like a picture that I take for me has like multiple functions. It's just, beautiful to look at, but it's also documentation. And this is one of my favorite habitats within the Amazon. Would it be possible to advance to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. I also take close-up photos. So I do both landscapes and close-ups because when I'm out in nature, I'm looking at literally like everything. I'm looking far away at the big picture. I'm looking close up at little things. I started out as an entomologist, and but I also love plants And I teach students in the field about, the relationships between animals and plants and fungi and all of the organisms that make up an ecosystem. And so this really just like obsession with nature just, started to form my understanding of nature, that you have to look at it both from the landscape perspective, like you have to look at the whole, but you also have to look at the minutia, which is why I chose this photo to really understand nature. And so I was invited to participate in GardenShip. Again, as I said, as my role as a curator of the zoology collection, which is just very briefly, it's a collection at Western in the Department of Biology of animal specimens from around the world. And the collection itself dates to approximately 1920, when the Department of Zoology was created at Western. And, like all typical zoology departments around the world in universities, they had a collection, which was of specimens that was for research and teaching purposes. And so I'm in charge of this 100-year-old collection. It is mostly a historical collection. In other words, we're not actively collecting. We don't go out and shoot animals and collect specimens. We're just preserving what we have and using the specimens for research, but also for teaching and outreach. And so this was part of Mary Mattingly's Ecotopian Library. And so those 4 boxes, if you will, with glass tops, which are, they're drawers, actually. They're museum specimen drawers. I put together four displays for the Ecotopian Library. And if we could have the next slide, thank you so much. So here's a close-up of one of them. So these, so I put together bats and moths because, I'm always trying to show relationships and teach people about the relationships of nature, that, nature is not like this species and that species. It's, species working together. It's communities of species and interacting with, the abiotic aspects of the environments as well, the water, the soil, the sunlight, forming these habitats. And so, there's only so much you can do with specimens, but again, the value of the specimen is being able to look at the minutia. When you have a preserved specimen, even just with the naked eye, but also if you have a magnifying glass of some sort, you can look at like the hairs on the bats, and you can look at the skin, and you can look at the eyes and the eyelashes and the claws and the little tiny, aspects of their anatomy, and you can learn things about these animals that it's very hard to do when the animal is alive. And so, specimens have. And of course, they're used for all sorts of research projects, but they just have incredible educational value. So these 4 bat specimens, 3 of them were collected 2 of them were collected in the late 1800s by William Saunders. One of them was collected around 1918. And then the 4th one was collected in 1939. So just to give you an idea, like these are old specimens that we're not going out and euthanizing animals now. I mean, we do it very occasionally if we're doing research and the specimens are always collected with permission, with permits, all the various permits that are necessary. But we have this incredible collection, and the moth specimens as well are decades old. And so that was just showing you a close-up of one of the 4 displays that I did for the exhibition, and then just telling you a little bit about the collection in general. So I'm not sure if there is one more slide. No? Okay, so I think I'm just going to end it there, and I look forward to further discussion with everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Nina. And then our final panelist is Ruth Skinner. Ruth works as an arts organizer, researcher, curator, publisher, and educator in London, Ontario. She is also an instructor at Western University, Lakehead University, and Fanshawe College. Her current doctoral research encompasses experimental publishing practices, artist books, forensics, and clairvoyance. Welcome up.
It sounds so weird when I hear it like that. Michelle, I also have notes. So we have me too, needing notes. And also thank you. Thank you to Michelle. Thank you to Ashley. Thank you to Patrick for organizing an amazing event. And thank you also to Jeff and to Patrick for inviting me into the GardenShip community, because I'm working with GardenShip and with the incredible Katie Wilhelm on the catalog, and really looking forward to talking to everyone about that in more detail tomorrow. So I'll talk a little bit. I'm an academic who really likes to work collaboratively in the community, and I think that that's quite vital for any kind of research-related work, like how it gets out into the world. And my personal passion and focus or interest, research interest, whatever you want to call it, is on artists publishing and artist books. And I think about it in relation to a series of questions, like what is it to practice publishing? Can you have a publishing practice? What does that mean? So there's like a bunch of semantic and conceptual stuff that I could go on about, but at the end of the day, it's also about making, and it's about making collaboratively, and it's also about putting it out into the world. So distributing it and seeing what kinds of communities might be interested, or what kinds of communities those little publishing outputs might generate as a result. And so I have a few images of that and the kind of work that I've been doing with a lot of different people. So here you'll see I operate in a small arts imprint called Edna Press, and I was really fortunate to be able to invite Sarah Monroe, artist Sarah Monroe, who works here at the museum, and artist Faith Patrick, to work with one another to produce a game, a card deck, called the Objectless Black Box, the Objectless Perception Game. And we launched it here in London at Support Project Space. And so for the event, Faith and Sarah, and we invited Kim Newdorf and Kevin Heslop, we all got together to play the game, which involved listening to someone with a melodious sounding voice read Faith Patrick's poetic visualizations and then draw. And Faith's visualizations were based on Sarah's gorgeous, obscure, ephemeral, and kind of unrealistic collages. Support, the space itself, was a small little site in Soho that was co-programmed with Liza Urick and Tegan Moore, who you see there. And that idea of support is an ethos that I think many of us in this room are really familiar with from kind of how you do your thing. What is at the core of your thing? And for us, it's very much about support, whether that's showing up or trying to program events with the people that you really kind of just are interested in working with. So another slide, I don't know which one it is. Okay, so this was an exhibition at the Macintosh Gallery, and I know that Abby Vincent and Helen Gregory are here, so hi. This was my opportunity to dig into the history of arts publishing in London, and also the very current, exciting series of arts publishers who are working here today. And so it was also, I joke, an excuse for me to just reach out to people who were publishing here in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and just bother them and create an exhibition around those conversations. And so you'll see here the takeaway for the exhibition. I had a chat with a few publishers, Mike Niederman and Joan Brennan, who were operating in the 70s and the 80s. And the way they talked about bringing their publishing, their books, their magazines together, is they would have to lay them out on the table, all these pages, and just like shuffle around the table, order them, and staple them. And they would spend hours doing that. And so that's what visitors had to do. And I thought that was, to me, fun and engaging, and it also allowed you to have a little bit more of a tangible hands-on experience. And those are Mike Niederman's beautiful hands that you can see making the first book with his own series of images that we were allowed to photocopy. That event also, thanks to the Macintosh, allowed me to invite a couple of local publishers to just have their publications in the Macintosh's a collection of printed matter, which is a real boost as a young artist to say, like, I'm in a public collection. And I think, again, that goes back to that notion of support. What kind of support can you do? And again, it's support. During the COVID pandemic, a couple of publishing projects I was really hoping to do with friends, they just paused, like everything paused. My mental capacity for reading paused, like everything just went out the window. And so we were able to offer our space to artists who were really interested in kind of keeping conversations going. And so this is Zine Fiends, run by Jill Clare and a number of other amazing artists and activists here in town. Zine Fiends is all about gathering community together, artists who are interested in publishing together. They meet at the library. And for a few weeks, they all got together and used support as a kind of ad hoc exhibition space, gathering space, and store. And to me, again, that's what publishing is all about. That's what you kind of need to do. You need to think of it not only in terms of that quiet work that you might do in solitude, but also what happens after the book is made. And to me, that comes a little bit from a mentor, Maria Fusco, who talks about, you make a thing, but then you kind of got to test the methods of that thing against themselves. So how do you do that? How do you have your object and then test it against itself? And I think that can be translated into a series of kind of practices or interests. So that informed the way that we approached the Almanac, this idea of a publication that's not just an archive, but it's lively. It's something that offers you things to do now when you leave here today. Riley's beautiful directives and directions for dying, or Michelle's incredible map, which you can carry with you and learn geographically this new space. And that's kind of the only thing I'm really hoping to continue doing in my work. So like Paul said, I'll just talk to you later. We'll leave it there. But thank you.
Okay, thank you all. I'm going to ask our panelists to come up and grab a chair and a mic. Yeah, so we had a couple of questions that we sent out a little earlier to the panelists to kind of prime the pump, as it were, get them thinking about this question of the intersection of, art and art practice and community. And so there's two questions that I've got, and then I also want to open up questions to the audience. So our first one is, as an artist, or cultural worker, scholar, or community leader, what do you see as the potential aspiration that your work makes possible in your community or communities? How might your aspirations vary with respect to the audience and communities who experience your work? So now I'm going to join you on the stage, and you have to have an answer by the time I get there. Like to start us off.
I can try to start. Okay. I think there would be two major aspirations for the Embassy Cultural House. I think one thing is that we really wanted to create a space where there was none for people who were had projects ready and waiting and willing and just did not have the support or the community to present it to. And I think I'll share just one or two examples. For example, Juno Award-winning musician Lorraine Klassen came from Montreal to our community in London, Ontario, and being sort of displaced from her original audience, did not really have people who were interested in hearing her sing or interested in showing up to see her in concert. So Jamili, when finding out that she moved here, sort of jumped on that and created space for her to sing. And she's been at a number of events and has sort of crossed over into other groups. And one example would be Stories of Survival, which was hosted here at Museum London a couple of weeks ago. And that was mainly programmed by Juan Bello and Imogen Clendenning, who are both part of the Embassy Cultural House. And Juan had basically had this really beautiful documentary that he had nowhere to show it because everything had closed down, and it all sort of fell through because of COVID. And we sort of picked it up and said, okay, well, we'll find you a new space. So I think for us, it's really important. The embassy, a very large community that does not just include me, Jamili, or Ron. We've just tried to help fill in the gaps where there are spaces missing, and also create opportunities for people who maybe have not had a chance to speak or to be part of something or to have a community.
Thank you. Yeah, Nina, do you want to take that up?
Sure. Thank you, Tom. In all of my work, my aspiration is to, well, people call me a dreamer. It's literally to stop biodiversity loss and to stop the destruction of nature. I don't talk so much about climate change because my focus, again, it's habitat loss. It's the conversion of wild habitat to things like parking lots and shopping malls and, resource extraction sites, agricultural housing development. It's that's what I do, is I help people to understand what biodiversity is, why does it matter, and why everyone should be concerned. And through specimens, as I mentioned already, that gives us that ability to look really closely at biodiversity in a way that we can't do necessarily or very easily when we're out, enjoying nature or looking at living things. I get called that a lot, and I'm a proud dreamer, and I love what I do. And so, any opportunity that I have, I take it to engage with a different community. It is such a breath of fresh air to be interacting with the arts community. Let me tell you, scientific community is lovely, but can be, different. And, sometimes, just confining, I guess. And so I don't, I love teaching biology students, but I really enjoy teaching anyone who's interested in the subject matter that I teach. So I think, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and before we leave you, I just, you also seeing those displays and the specimens that you're working with. I want to kind of push the idea of what community could mean, a more than human communities as well. You work very intimately with these specimens that were lives that you care about. And I would just wonder if you could reflect on what it means to actually spend time, in this community as well. Because I'm going to bug Paul about the same question, working with non-human or more than human communities as well. I could come back to you, or you can just take a swing at that one.
So when you're saying, could you just?
You work very intimately, closely with animals, with specimens, right? And so I'm kind of pushing the idea of what working in communities is about. You're working with animal communities as well, more than human communities.
Okay.
And just talk about, there's an intimacy, and I would say, I dare say, a love that is expressed in the work that you do. And I just would invite you to reflect on that.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, I understand. So I was so interested in the discussion earlier about trespassing, and I'm going to say something that this is not meant to offend anybody. This is just from my heart. Like, I feel like I believe that all humans are trespassing on this earth, and that it's the plants and animals, fungi, and other organisms that that own, if you will, the land, if you want to talk about ownership, and that and so we have to, I think, just completely reimagine our and re-understand our relationship with nature in order to solve our environmental crises, and it's you know, and now today people are so disconnected from the natural world, from that community. I feel so fortunate that I am able to spend the time that I can in nature, not just only here in London, here in Ontario, but in the rainforest, in the Amazon, and that's where that's my community. Like I love people, but I also love creepy crawlies and spiders and worms and whatever, rotting fungi. It's all fascinating. And so, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
All right, Paul, do you want to take up questions of community and various audiences for your communities that you work with?
All these talks about trespassing remind me of when I was a little Catholic boy and I misspoke the Lord's Prayer to say, "Forgive me for trespassing." But I remember getting the email for this panel, like saying what we were going to be talking about, and I emailed Patrick back saying, "I don't know if I'm on the right panel. Maybe put me with plants or something." But thinking about it more, I was like, "Yeah, no, it does make sense." One of the key aspirations for me, I think, with my practice is kind of connecting people and other than human, into communities and kind of building. So these sculptures and projects that I work on, I kind of think about them as assemblages, but you can also think of them as kind of ad hoc communities or one-offs or parts of a larger kind of constellation of things in the world brought into a smaller, kind of more comprehensible object or series of objects. And I think one of the things that's been hardest for me has been trying to translate that into working with human communities to try and branch things out because of how essential that is for environmental and social activism, obviously, working with communities. Michelle has been very patient with me with my sometimes shortcomings in terms of organizing, and that I think is one of the things that I'm really trying to aspire to do more, is the socially engaged side of art because it's so important. But also maintaining this this ethos that I've had for a long time of connecting people with things that I'm passionate about, with the environment and other than human communities, and thinking about our place in those communities. So not necessarily just talking about community in terms of a community-based art project, but where does that piece of art or the subjects in that piece, where do they fit into kind of philosophical ideas of community? And I don't know if I'm just rambling, but
You're not at all.
okay, I'm kind of piecing it together as I go. Yeah. The sugar is kind of coming down. So yeah, I think, trying to think about how I can have these sculptures that I see as communities be influenced by communities, and also like it's just communities all the way down. It's like fractals of communities, if that makes sense. Yeah, like thinking about like atoms and molecules and compounds and things building up, and it's like if you think about communities nested in that kind of way, I think that's kind of where my brain's at right now.
Yeah, nesting communities. That's interesting. Ruth, it was really interesting to hear you kind of talk about publishing. And I was thinking about the ecology of publishing and these kind of interrelated communities that you're working about. So I'm going to pass it to you and see whether you would take that up.
Yeah, thank you. So artists publishing it encompasses so much in terms of subject or approach. So it can be very poetic, it can be very funny, it can be a very rarefied, beautiful, very expensive object that you can never put your hands on. It can be a quick zine that you just dash off and throw in the mail or just put somewhere for people to pick up as they pass by. And so for me, I'm going to borrow from this incredible educator and publisher, Paul Suellis, who in the midst of the pandemic was part of this great panel about like, what is it to publish as an artist right now in the midst of all these interrelated international crises. And he used the phrase urgent artifacts. Think about these publications as urgent artifacts. And I liked that phrase because artifacts, you tend to, your mind goes to this notion of a dead, static, archived thing. And obviously, a lot of these artist books you can really only access through archives now. They're harder to get to. But the urgent part strikes a tone of the urgency of the moment from which they come, and also the ongoing urgency that they can produce, depending on like getting them to your audiences. So immediately, like Embassy Cultural House's publications to me are urgent artifacts. Hiding in Plain Sight or Pandemic Gardens are lively, and when you pick it up, you make contact with the moment from which they evolved out of. And that continues a conversation and an urgency, and it collapses time a little bit if we want to get weird about it, but it's important. So that to me is what I would say in relation to the aspirational and also the community thing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Michelle, well, where do you want to jump in?
Where are we going with it? Okay. I'm never frustrated with you, Paul.
I just put that on me.
No. Paul and I have a big, can I talk about our big aspiration?
No. Yeah.
I'm going to talk about it.
You do it because I keep missing opportunities to do it.
This is a good, well, Embassy Cultural House and GardenShip supported an initial workshop for an idea that Paul and I have been clinging to for years now. When Paul started making that script of the names of the murdered land defenders, he also started talking about creating something with more physicality and more interaction for an audience. And it kind of got me dreaming. And so we came together and we talked about making these chain links that are made out of unfired clay mixed with native seeds, and that each link of this chain would carry the name of one of these people who have been murdered defending their land. And so we had this beautiful dream of building this database with all these people and their stories. That data would be driven by community who would enter it. We would have satellite workshops across Turtle Island where clay workers would harvest clay from their sites, come together with their communities and do their part of the archive to record those names, and that eventually those links would come together and link arms and carry those names and be together just for a brief moment. And then the community would come and take those links out into the world and bring new life. Because, I mean, what is more hopeful than demanding that the world be better? So, but we don't have any money and we don't have any space, so we haven't done it yet. But that's a huge aspiration. And then I think that Adrienne Marie Brown has this beautiful quote where she is this like charismatic leader, and she got drained by that work. And she talks about, I used to try and make change a mile wide, but it was always an inch deep. And for me, I'm not the most like comfortable public speaker, but I think this work is important. And so for me, my aspiration is to go out and make change an inch wide but a mile deep by creating connections with people. So,
Hear, hear. Yeah, thank you. So I have a second question. But I would also encourage panelists to kind of jump in where they want to. If they feel like they've got a reflection or a response to another panelist, please feel free to do so. And this relates, of course, back to this question of community. And I think I'm trying to kind of get maybe towards thinking about definitions of community. So the question is, how do your activities enlarge, challenge, reimagine, and or affirm what community means or is or can be? And I'm going to start, Paul. In the middle with you.
Thought I'd be safe in the middle.
Yeah,
'cause,
I know. I
at least
had that
two
look
other
about you,
people.
and I thought, that's no good.
How does it define?
Yeah. How does your work, do you think, kind of redefine or challenge or affirm?
Reinforce?
Reinforce, trespass.
Yeah.
On this idea of community. It's interesting just because I think we use community is really used a lot these days.
Yeah.
We talk about community and it has become one of those words that we kind of rehearse and we kind of put in our addresses, and it's one of those.
Well, in some ways, I think it's become like one of those words that's used in like the social side of like greenwashing sometimes. Like people just put community in their title for something and assume that that's like enough. But I think it's really, like Michelle was saying, like drilling down and like focusing in on these things that make a community significant in some way, whether that's ecologically with keystone species or in a physical human community, maybe. There's a certain person that everybody gravitates around, or like they really hold things together. Like Michelle with the Coves Collective. But how does my work do that?
And just not to interrupt, talk maybe just a little bit about the work that you did with the Grand River and the poetry that was involved in that.
Yeah, so that project was one of my more directly community-based projects. So I'm based in Dunnville, Ontario, and there was a call for projects to do with the Great Lakes. And to me, thinking about the Great Lakes was kind of like thinking about like a kid without their parent. Like I was thinking about the Great Lakes watershed as a whole, going back to your talking about watersheds, Tom. And Dunnville is right on the Grand River. So my initial idea was, okay, well, I'm going to focus on these rivers as feeding into the lakes and making them what they are. So over time, the project evolved into the sculptural element is this half-buried aluminum boat on the banks of the Grand River. And it is covered in, no, I didn't think there would be. So I'll try and vividly describe it. There's this half-buried aluminum boat. It looks like it's popping a wheelie out of the ground. The boats don't have wheels. It's going like this out of the ground. And the hull, the top half of the hull is covered in hundreds of different species names from the Grand River watershed. So including fish, invertebrates, humans are on there, mammals, reptiles, birds, and including including Lake Erie. So it goes all the way up from the headwaters down to the lake. And then on the bottom of the boat, so the keel and the surrounding, it doesn't matter. The part from the bottom of the boat up to like the rim is covered in these, does anybody know what mind maps are? There are these kind of, it's a form of note-taking where you have like a concept and then you draw it out to another, and then that connects to another. It's kind of like a verbal community where you're note-taking as like a constellation of ideas rather than like paragraph. And sometimes I find, and a lot of people find, that conventional note-taking maybe isn't the most effective way of remembering things. So this is more of like a mnemonic device for remembering. And I ran these workshops where people would make these mind maps after having taken part in learning from a community leader. So I brought in a philosopher from Guelph. I brought in ecologists from my area. We went to an organic farm and we did these mind maps. And then I took those mind maps from the participants forcibly. And no, they gave them to me at the end. And I sort of transcribed them onto the hull of this boat, and that became kind of a living, well, not living, it became a kind of a recorded document on this sculpture of these ideas that everybody had, and then I kind of made a mind map out of the mind maps. So it became this kind of community record of the thinking of the part that the river played in the ecological community. So again, it was like community, 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 community.
Amazing.
So
thank you.
It was fun. Yeah.
I know that we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm gonna try to get to everyone here and maybe get in one question if we can. Olivia, do you want to jump in on the question of like your work in relation to reconfiguring, rethinking community?
Sure, thank you. I really like that idea of urgent artifacts, if I'm getting that right. I think kind of reorienting what community is, I think a really obvious thing for us is sort of looking at what is institutional and what is bureaucratic, but holding those as really positive things for our group. So, for example, the ECH is very intergenerational, and generally there would be a conflict of interest if you were working with your son or your grandfather or your child, or even just working with your friends. And for us, that's actually a really critical aspect of the embassy, because these are people that care for us and we care for them. And there's a lot of love and empathy and trust between all of us. And so we celebrate that. And it's something that we really foster is not only relationships with our friends and our family, but also our proverbial family and friends that we have fostered through this collective. And I would say that just on that point of urgent artifacts, that definitely the community has become a place where we are responding to these crises as best we can and using it as a place where people can churn through their feelings and their emotions and their criticisms and thoughts of, life-altering, world-altering events are happening. And I'd say that happens with GardenShip, with a lot of the partnerships that we do, but also, for example, with what's happening in Iran. We put out a statement and we got involved with some of the Iranian artists in ECH. Nilafar Salimi helped write our response to that, and that's also a continuing part of what we do.
Thank you so much. I think we have enough time for one question for the audience. I apologize. We're running a little bit late. So if there's someone who would like to ask a question, I will be Phil Donahue and run right down to you. Yeah.
Thanks for the panel. It was fabulous. Throughout the panel, I kept thinking about the idea of small community and big community, and tremendous tension there exists there. It's a big question, so I don't know, maybe one person specifically, how you can be more active maybe on a small scale, but how we need to be active on a global scale, and quick thought on that maybe.
Who would
like to take that up?
That's a you and me question. Yeah, because I think I think that you make for me, I make those connections, and I was talking to someone here today just about the coves, and they were telling me things that I didn't know that opened something up, and I don't think that they knew that we cared about this space in that way, and telling those stories is so important, but it's not going to happen in the library, right? It's only going to happen by being with people and being an enthusiastic nerd. But then why do I record the stories? Why do I narrate them? Why do we make the map so that we can have this mnemonic device to keep talking about it? Because we hope to reach a larger community, right? And I feel like that's.
Yeah, it is a tense relationship, and I appreciated Michelle's conversation earlier and Adrienne Marie Brown and this notion of burnout is a thing, and you really do have to think about the the depth of the change you're trying to make and how feasible it is. And I do think that sometimes a small local shift can be really valuable, but I also do agree that these rarefied, isolated conversations are also not helpful either. And that's not a question that can be easily answered. I can tell you practical answers for me as a publisher. It's like, don't just publish 100 copies of that book that no one can afford, make it digital. Circulate it to different groups who are going to be interested and who actually feel like they can have input on it. And then that momentum is going to spiral out that way. So there are tactical things you can do, but I think conceptually, that's a question to chew on. Thanks.
Nina, do you want to have the last word?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a hard question, and I don't know that it. I mean, I think tackling both is really hard, I think, and probably going to lead to burnout. I think we're lucky, to look at the internet as a good thing, because mostly I look at it as a bad thing these days. But is that the ability to reach so many people, like you were saying, Ruth. That's one of the wonderful things about the internet. And so so we can do like some little project, but put it on the internet, and then it becomes or potentially could become known, at least globally. But yeah, I just think we undervalue small scale. Today, like in science, there's all this big data, and I'm just like, gag me with a spoon. Like like there's so much value. We forget about the value of doing little projects and small things and in our communities, and looking at tiny little things like the little ant, crawling around and versus like the bald eagle. And so, we have to, I mean, there's value in both. And I think there's value in both. And I think that there's room for both too.
Thank you. I want to thank these wonderful panelists for being here with us this afternoon. Let's show them our appreciation.